Welcome to the AskARoofer podcast, where all your roofing questions find their answers. Your hosts, Megan Ellsworth and Lauren White, peel back the layers of the roofing world to reveal the knowledge, tips, and FAQs you've been curious about. From shingles to skylights, metal to asphalt, we're here to demystify the system above your head. So get ready to ask, learn, and explore the fascinating world of roofing, one question at a time, on the AskARoofer podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AskARoofer podcast. I'm Lauren White, and I am here today with two people from WTI and the Pure Air division. And Ryan and Frank, why don't I have you two introduce yourselves, please?
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Well, I'm Ryan Gottermeyer. I'm the Director of Field Operations here at Pure Air, which is a subsidiary of Weatherproofing Technologies, who is an affiliate of Tremco Roofing. So I'm responsible for the execution day-to-day of any of the projects that our Tremco Roofing reps sell from an HVAC and mechanical perspective across the nation.
And I'm Frank Santini, Director of Sales here at Pure Air, and I'm responsible for getting our large sales force of several hundred representatives to get out there and educate the commercial property managers and commercial facility directors on Pure Air services.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here. We're excited to talk more about HVAC and air handlers for our property owners on AskARoofer. So just to get started, did you get involved in indoor air quality and air handler restoration?
So for me, I'm a fourth generation mechanical contractor. My family's owned a company in upstate New York, a mechanical contracting business since 1903. So I kind of grew up in and around the industry. And so it's always been a part of my life. And then Tremco found me, or Pure Air found me. And a couple of years ago, I moved down here with my wife, who's originally from Clearwater, Florida. So that's kind of how our paths merged.
Yeah, and for me, it was just more of a passion for environmental causes. My previous career, there's a lot of work being done and not much to show for it. So I got to be able to see actual, improvement in indoor air quality, improvement in the way the HVAC works from the work that we were doing. That and I really felt good about that, and also, learning about all the science behind indoor air quality as well.
Yeah, that's great. It's always so interesting to hear how people get into such, niche areas, and especially in roofing, people are just I fell into it, or I had a passion and it brought me here. So very cool. For those who aren't as familiar with indoor air quality, can you explain what that is and why it's so important for building occupants?
So, I mean, you could really divide indoor air quality into two big categories. One is the quality of the air in the sense of having less contaminants in the air. Ideally, obviously, if you're inside of a building, whether it's a hospital, school, commercial property, you want to be breathing less contaminants. And contaminants can mean lots of things. It could be mold spores, could be bacterial contaminants, could be what we call VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, chemicals in the air. Could be human skin cells that are often great nutrients for bacteria and mold. So you don't like to have them around, but they're always going to be around because we're always shedding human skin cells. Every time we're talking right now, we're shedding human skin cells. So the quality of the air, in the sense of reducing the amount of contaminants in a given small space, is a big deal. And the other piece to air quality is reducing carbon dioxide, having fresh air inside the building, so that we have, obviously, less CO2, which has been plenty of studies out there from Harvard and many others showing that obviously high CO2 will make you tired. Well, we all kind of know that, but they did a bunch of studies on that in 2016 and beyond. So we want to make sure that we have fresh air. We also want to make sure the contaminants in the air are as small as possible. You always have some contaminants because it's just the nature of things. There's mold everywhere, but you're going to try to reduce that through filtration and through providing fresh air and some of the other things we're going to be talking about today.
Great. And, I'm in Central Oregon right now, so we've got a lot of smoke coming in from wildfires. And so this is, very interesting to talk about and very important because I feel like smoke and, like you're saying, those contaminants are everywhere, even just in your day-to-day life. So what can you explain some common issues that affect air handlers and HVAC assets in commercial buildings, and kind of explain like what those are, what those might look like to people who are unfamiliar?
Sure. So, an air handler an air handler is kind of the lungs of the building. It breathes in and out. It pushes new air in and it returns or cycles and exhausts old air out. So, right off the bat, proper filtration, it's part of a robust maintenance program. A lot of facilities do maintain proper filtration, but sometimes over time those deteriorate and cause a problem where they're not properly filtering the air. Another issue is for roof-mounted air handling systems, the water intrusion in the cabinet itself. If water gets into the air handler, the water goes through that air handler into the building. It causes, humidity or water, which leads to mold. So waterproofing and preventing those humidity issues internal to the building are a huge focus for indoor air quality.
Yeah, we can go on further, Lauren. I know we have a lot to cover in this podcast, but just another, for instance, is some air handlers are what we call single walled, meaning the air handler itself has to be insulated to prevent condensation from forming. And oftentimes, particularly in the case of older air handlers, you'll have a situation where the fiberglass exposed insulation can become moist and dirty from lack of maintenance. And that can be an excellent substrate for mold growth because it's because its porous nature, and as I mentioned before, all the millions of different contaminants, including human skin cells, that can get in there and become a great breeding ground for mold growth. So that's another example there of how indoor air quality can be affected by the air handler itself, and because of the old insulations become deteriorated and moldy.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of leads us into our next point to talk about is how those issues, either through the roof or through, the air handlers themselves affect the IAQ, that indoor air quality of a building, and therefore the occupants. Is there any more to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so for most of the listeners of this podcast, roofers in particular, they fight water intrusion all the time, and so probably there isn't a roofer listening to this podcast that hasn't been on a job site where they touched a roof and there's an allegation that there's water intrusion into the building, and they come and they investigate and they find out that it's the air handling unit themselves. So, all of these issues in and around the HVAC that sits on a roof leads to water intrusion inside of a building, which is something that, a roofer will find himself maybe, I won't say in an argument with a building owner, but maybe at the other side of the table where they're dealing with an issue that may not be their fault. It may not be a true story of what's going on. They may be replacing a roof in and around a piece of HVAC equipment, and they're being blamed for water that is getting in. And when water gets into the building and the HVAC equipment isn't sized properly to handle that excess water and get that moisture out, there could be a dampness or a clamminess inside. I'm sure you've been in a building before where you just kind of walk in and you can feel it. You just feel that the humidity is off. It's far too high, and it's just generally uncomfortable to be in. So in a situation where you're the roofer and you're touching the roof, you're the first person that anyone points at. And we're kind of here to say, maybe not always. Maybe it isn't your fault. So, that's kind of the broader message that we want to bring today to this audience.
We can get into a whole other subject with respect to the actual operational, efficiency of the unit itself. Ryan covered, making sure that unit's not having the intrusion that we talked about, and oftentimes how the roofer is the first person the client looks to. But then the actual operation of the unit itself is important. Because we want to make sure that the unit's producing enough airflow to actually condition the space correctly, dehumidify the space, as Ryan just mentioned, and that might be an issue depending on the condition of the major component parts inside that unit, which is typically a coil and what's called a blower or fan. Those pieces of equipment are not working properly or not sized properly. That can lead to a lot of issues, not only just the issues of how much air is getting downstream, but also if these components aren't cleaned properly, again, becoming that substrate or that that place for mold and bacteria to grow, and obviously hinder air quality, even despite filtration, because you'll have a lot of what's called filter bypass. So this dirt and debris and all these bad things, if you will get past the filters if they're not properly maintained and fitted correctly. And then you'll have situations where you have some concern about the amount of contaminants in the unit. And as you pass a certain part of the unit and the humidity rises, that also lends itself to more mold growth, because mold needs obviously moisture and humidity to proliferate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of on the flip side of, the building owners going to the roofer first of, what's wrong with my HVAC unit, do you have advice besides, regular maintenance for those building owners of what to look for or what to consider before, if there should be something wrong with their HVAC or they feel like it's humid in their building?
Yeah, I mean, as I alluded before, preventative maintenance program is obviously the first line of defense. Kind of, a doctor would tell a patient to eat healthy. Have a maintenance program on your air handling equipment and make sure that they're operating efficiently. And that way, you kind of have a baseline of how your business is performing, or your HVAC assets are performing. So, making sure that you can benchmark how it's performing over time, and then allocating your dollars appropriately to know that these units do have a shelf life. Here at Pure Air, we believe in the idea of air handler restoration. If you listen to ASHRAE or some of the industry leaders will say 12 to 15 years is about all you'll get out of an air handler, and that may be true in some cases, but our entire business is around stretching that CapEx dollar further and actually restoring the unit, bringing it back to the way that it was, when it was originally installed, and saving the business owner money by not having to go and not having to replace it. But that requires getting ahead of it, thinking about it, and making it a priority inside your budgeting and capital spend.
And then when you do that, Lauren, you avoid issues, as Ryan just alluded to, avoiding potentially having to replace a unit that you otherwise may not have to replace if you catch it early enough in its lifespan, but also avoid issues with respect to efficiency problems. One of the things that we do oftentimes is retrofit what's called a fan array in the place of the existing fan inside these units. And the fan array provides multiple fans, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 fans that go in the cabinet, as opposed to just a single fan that most of these old units have. If you have redundancy, multiple fans, then you have lesser risk of having that unit go down, and lesser risk of having no airflow to a certain area. And when you have no airflow, that's when you risk all the things I talked about earlier. Not having, not getting rid of that CO2, not removing those contaminants and bringing fresh air and diluting the contaminants in the air. So that helps in the sense of removing that concern. But also, there's also efficiency issues and those kind of things that we can get into a little bit later here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, all the things that you necessarily don't think about all the time until there's an issue, but it's so important, like a roof, like the HVAC, to have those plans in place and have reminders to maintenance and check them out. So with that, what systems and services does Tremco offer to address the IAQ and HVAC issues in buildings, or the Pure Air?
Yeah, I won't speak for all of Tremco. Tremco is a very, very large organization, and we represent a very small piece of it. So I will not speak to Tremco at large, but I will say for us at Pure Air that we are a mechanical restoration business. I mean, we've been doing it for 40 years. Tremco acquired us a few years ago, but for 40 years, we've been focused on indoor air quality and air handler restoration. And we do this, it's sort of a three-pronged approach. We start with an assessment. We'll assess the piece of equipment for you and benchmark its performance against where it should be. That assessment will generate a report and a set of engineering documents as to how we would go about restoring this particular unit. And then we have a self-perform restoration crew. I mean, we have 40 field guys dedicated all year round to restoring air handlers across the country. So that's what Pure Air brings to the table, and Frank can probably expand on that, a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what Ryan's saying, when you execute this kind of work, first of all, the one thing you think about is, what's the value of this? Well, if you can restore or refurbish a unit, and you're spending a lot less to do that, and you're getting essentially the same product, a unit that works and provides the airflow you need and is clean, and it costs 20% or a third of what they're going to spend to replace, that can be very attractive to building owners. But then we look at what are the other ancillary benefits? Well, if you're improving the efficiency of that unit through the work that we do to the major component parts, that could also result in an energy savings. And then we look at the indoor air quality piece to this again. You're having better airflow, or at least the less risk of loosening the airflow by virtue of the redundant fan system. And then you have a clean system after you get done, so you're removing the potential risk of agitating contaminants that were in the system before, either that were stuck in that insulation I referred to earlier, or just embedded in the coil. And there's all kinds of what's called biofilm, which is if you think about the swamp thing, what that looks like on a microscopic level, the nastiness of mold, bacteria growth, and even viruses and so forth. So when you do this kind of work, you clean the unit up, you make it more efficient. I'm talking very 30,000 foot view here. And then you seal the unit, as Ryan alluded to earlier, because you want to try to prevent the intrusion, especially for these rooftop units. And you get a piece of equipment then that is warranted, and you have more of a peace of mind that your asset's going to last a lot longer for you and not fail suddenly, which can be a very big deal in a variety of different types of verticals, from healthcare to municipalities, colleges, and so forth, and manufacturing, where the unit goes down because of its age or lack of maintenance. It can be a very big deal and cost the customer a lot of money. Imagine a situation where an operating room can't be used because the air conditioning is not working that day. So completely, not going to fly with the needs for the environmental care in that situation. So that's the idea here, is to try to avoid those issues and then save money in the process.
Definitely. I'm sure a lot of people are thrilled with that, to save money and keep their equipment running longer, and not have to replace it after those 12 to 15 year potential shelf life. Do you have any success stories or projects that maybe stand out where Pure Air's solutions significantly improved a building's IAQ?
There's so many. I mean, I could talk about the project we had recently in Texas, Ryan, where we had 2 units that the client, is healthcare client, hospital. The client wanted to replace these 2 units, but the way they wanted to replace the units was going to involve a whole re-engineering of that part of the hospital, and actually move the location of the units from a spot inside of what's called a mechanical room to a rooftop. And so it was going to be like $1.8 million to do those replacements. We were able to do the restoration for about $400,000. So you had $400,000 to restore versus $1.8 million to replace. Now that's the easiest example of a low-hanging fruit, because you not only have the value of restoring a unit in place, but you have the value of avoiding a whole bunch of logistics that would have been involved in the replacement. And so that's what we try to do. Even when logistical issues aren't as big of a concern, still a great value. But when they are a concern, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and in terms of getting mold remediated and or getting the biological contaminants, the air quality, correct. We've got multiple situations, particularly here in Florida. It's a very humid environment where we've gone in, we've done an assessment, we've determined that the piece of equipment isn't performing to the way it was supposed to. And a lot of times our healthcare clients find a lot of value in this. They have specific rules with regards to humidity as to what they can do for patient care. But we go in our assessment, determine that the piece of equipment isn't performing. And, we just the other day, we did one across the coast, over in Boca, where we were able to bring an air handler back to the way it was designed to perform, for minimal invasiveness and minimal cost, and it allows them to continue on doing the work that they're doing. So, plenty of opportunity, not just here in Florida in a humid, moist environment, but we've got countless. There's white paper. There's all kinds of white papers. If anyone's interested, we've got marketing collateral that you could dig through for hours.
That's amazing. What a significant price difference from that for that hospital. Um, and so, kind of looking forward, are there any technologies and innovations in IAQ and building maintenance, and how does Pure Air incorporate those advancements into your services?
So in terms of like cutting edge technology, COVID sort of exposed a lot of things. Bipolar ionization is starting to become huge. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and I believe that probably existed 20 years ago, but no one knew what it was. I certainly didn't. Now, with COVID, ionization is huge in the airstream, and even UV bulbs, UV technology, washing the coil with UV lights. Essentially, imagine a tanning bed light that you put across the inside of the unit so that as the air comes across the unit, it's killing anything organic that may be in the airstream and making it better for the health and comfort of the occupants wherever that airstream's going. We're seeing more of that. We're seeing more clients want that. Our engineers are specifying that in the restorations, more and more. HVAC is kind of an old it's really old technology. It started, William Carrier back in 1913. So there aren't a lot of new innovations, but using things and adding it to the airstream, we are starting to see more with UV and bipolar ionization. Those are two that immediately come to mind. I don't know if you've got any others, Frank, in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's cutting edge, but I mentioned before the fan array, which is the concept of taking what was typically one big fan that blows the air through the unit and replacing that with a wall of smaller, more efficient fans. And that way you have redundancy in case one of those fans fails. You have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 others that will ramp up and make a difference so that you're not just reliant on one single fan. That technology has been around for some time, but we, still not as ingrained as you see it, as it should be, because it's exceptionally helpful for a lot of different types of verticals.
Very cool. It's always fun to hear, like, maybe it's not a new tool, but how you're innovating, how things are changing and adapting to what people need. And yeah. So any other key takeaways that you'd like listeners to remember or know regarding IAQ and building maintenance, HVAC, kind of anything we've talked about today?
Yeah, I just think for the roofers that are listening to this, understanding indoor air quality and what's going on inside the buildings, roofers tend to spend a lot of time outside and on top of buildings, but inside the building it becomes a differentiator for you to even to speak about it. At any level of intelligence, it shows your customers that it's something that you understand impacts them. And for any building owners that are listening, I would just make them aware that there are opportunities. As a building owner, you've either got tenants or you're using it for a purpose for your employees, right? Like that indoor air quality is something to be focused on. There's a benefit there. And in terms of CapEx savings, the idea of air handler restoration over replacement is definitely something that should be running around in the back of your mind, as a building owner. So those are the takeaways I would recommend.
And for me, holistically, just thinking about the air duct work too, there's in some circles, a lot of folks are not too keen on cleaning their air duct work. But you do have situations where you're getting to somebody who's 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, etc., that they've never had their air ducts cleaned. And in some cases, it's fine. There's been great maintenance, great filtration, and there's maybe a thin layer of dust in the duct work. But in other cases that we've seen over the years, is this tremendous amounts of buildup of fouling in the ductwork to the point where it's actually obstructing the airflow because of these things inside ductwork, VAVs, reheat coils, terminal units, etc., that can collect on these components inside ductwork and restrict the airflow, and that can also not only provide the concern about contaminants getting stirred up by the air, but also from the perspective of actually restricting the air to get from the air handler downstream to the unit. So the takeaway is, despite what you may think, if you've gotten to a point where you got a building that's a couple decades old, never had the air ducts cleaned, at least check it out. Have a professional take a look inside. Certified indoor environmentalist, industrial hygienist, and take a look at a couple representative areas of that ductwork to make sure you don't have a tremendous amount of fouling buildup in the ductwork and along the component parts.
Yeah, Maintenance.
Always.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Learned so much about indoor air quality and HVAC units that I never knew before. And I'm sure our listeners will have some good takeaways as well. Thank you again, Pure Air, for your time. And this is the Ask a Roofer podcast. We will see you on the next one.
If your roof needs answers, subscribe now to the Ask a Roofer podcast. We've got your questions covered, one episode at a time. Go to AskARoofer.com to submit your questions and learn more. Stay tuned and keep those questions coming.